Living with my son, I found myself unexpectedly confronted by my mother-in-law with the blunt statement, "You need to leave." Surprised and hurt by her cold words, I reflected on my efforts to treat her well and ensure her comfort. However, it dawned on me that despite my intentions, there were instances when she treated me poorly, fostering a growing resentment within me. In that moment, I unexpectedly found myself expressing, "I'll gladly leave." Although it wasn't my initial intention, I realized it might be an accurate reflection of my true feelings. With my husband away on a business trip, the only one facing consequences if I left would be my mother-in-law. I couldn't help but ponder on the fact that the luxurious city life she enjoyed was made possible by my efforts. These thoughts led me to a decision. I chose to leave the house. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Catherine, turning 38 this year. Married for a decade, my husband and I, both working professionals, once contemplated having children. However, medical challenges made natural conception nearly impossible. After careful consideration, we decided to forego fertility treatments and embrace a childless life together. Our family dynamics shifted when my father-in-law fell ill and eventually passed away. Faced with ailing knees, my mother-in-law struggled to live alone in the family home. The idea of hiring a caregiver crossed our minds, but for safety reasons, we concluded it was best for her to live with us. During the planning of our new house, we incorporated features with her comfort in mind, including a ground floor room equipped with a small bathroom, kitchen, and toilet. Despite exceeding our budget, we believed it was the right decision, showcasing our consideration and kindness towards my mother-in-law's needs. It appeared that my mother-in-law didn't share the same perspective. I started noticing a shift in her behavior ever since she began living with us. While I had never harbored any negative impressions of her in the past, her recent actions had taken a more aggressive turn. What struck me was that her aggression heightened notably when my husband was away. Given his career in sales, my husband had started traveling abroad more frequently, with week-long trips becoming the norm. On one such occasion, after bidding him farewell for his international business trip, I was preparing for work, when I heard my mother-in-law's loud demand from downstairs, "Hey, come down here right now." Curious about the urgency, I hurried to the first floor, only to find everything seemingly normal. She was casually sitting in the living room, watching TV. I expected an emergency, but it turned out she just wanted me to make her breakfast, something she had never requested before. Both my husband and I have full-time jobs, and she had always managed her own meals. Puzzled, I asked if she wasn't feeling well, suggesting she see a doctor. Dismissing my concern, she asserted that, as my husband's wife, it was my duty to take care of her. She went on to mention other households where the wife, like me, prepares 3 meals a day, seemingly oblivious to the fact that those situations involve homemakers. Trying to convey our work commitments, I explained the impossibility of preparing breakfast and midday meals. However, she simply turned up the TV volume in frustration, indicating she wasn't interested in hearing my perspective. Realizing the futility of the conversation, I chose to remain silent that day. Upon returning home after work, I found my mother-in-law waiting for dinner. In an effort to bridge the gap, I had prepared lasagna, a dish she loves, but she was dismissive, exclaiming, "What's this? It's way too salty." She promptly threw all the prepared food into the trash. Following that incident, my mother-in-law's demeanor took a sharp turn, becoming increasingly domineering. She incessantly picked on me, nitpicking every action, feeling overwhelmed. I confided in a friend who suggested that it might be a case of bullying by my mother-in-law. A subsequent online search revealed numerous similar stories from others who have faced challenging dynamics with their own mother-in-laws. As my mother-in-law's behavior continued to deteriorate, I decided to address the issue head-on. Taking a day off from work, I initiated a heart-to-heart conversation with her during the day. I calmly asked, "Why have you suddenly become so hostile? We've always lived in harmony. If I've done something wrong, let me know. But if you don't talk to me, I won't know how to make things right." However, she displayed little interest in listening. When I patiently confronted her, she eventually started speaking. Apparently, she had become envious after hearing about a family she had talked about some time ago. In that family, there were 2 kids, a daughter and a son, and the couple lived with the husband's parents in a more spacious home. She envied their lifestyle, particularly the gatherings with many guests over coffee. She expressed a desire to spend her retirement in a similar manner. Trying to reassure her, I highlighted the positive aspects of our home. Our residence was not necessarily small, and in our neighborhood it was considered quite large. We even had a backyard spacious enough for barbecue parties. I suggested we could host home parties without any issues. Despite my efforts, she felt inferior and believed she couldn't compete, resulting in her reluctance to invite anyone over. Regrettably, our conversation didn't lead to any resolution, leaving the strained dynamics between us unresolved. However, a few days later, an unsettling incident unfolded. As I was leaving for work, I noticed a lady from across the street staring at me. Moreover, I observed people whispering and glancing my way. Puzzled, I checked my attire and makeup, finding nothing amiss. The reason for the whispers became clear that evening on my way home from work. A neighbor approached me and said, "Hey, I've heard some rumors. You know, violence isn't right." Taken aback, I delved deeper into the matter. The rumor circulating was that I had become violent with my mother-in-law, with the alleged confrontation taking place on the day we had our discussion. It was even said that I told her to leave if she continued with her lavish lifestyle. I had no recollection of such an incident, and harbored no intentions of ever behaving violently. After explaining this to the concerned neighbor, she pondered for a moment and remarked, "If that's true, it's really not good." The whole neighborhood is buzzing with this story. Apparently, when my mother-in-law had been approaching others, eager to discuss and share stories of my alleged violence, I found myself labeled as the violent wife in the neighborhood. I endured the false accusations for about 5 days after my husband left on a business trip. Unable to bear it any longer, I felt the need to address the situation. Initially, I considered talking to my husband first, but hesitated to bother him during his busy trip. Instead, I decided to communicate my feelings to my mother-in-law. "I've noticed you seem to have taken a disliking to me this past week. You're my husband's mother, and I wanted us to live comfortably together. No matter how hard I try, it seems I can't change how you feel. Perhaps it would be best if we consider living separately." My mother-in-law looked taken aback by my suggestion for a moment, but then she responded, "I agree. I never really liked you from the start, living in this fancy house on my son's dime and acting as if you've done it all. A woman who doesn't even have kids and only works has little value in my eyes." At that point, she scoffed, leaving me bewildered about her apparent misunderstanding, especially considering that I had bought the house with a down payment and handled everything on my own. I had previously explained the financial arrangement when we built the house, but it seemed my mother-in-law had forgotten. I am the one covering our living expenses, and my mother-in-law receives an allowance from my husband, which she tends to spend carelessly. However, that allowance ultimately comes from my salary. Despite my husband's hard work, his income is not as substantial as anticipated, and he earns less than I do. Our agreement was to use my income to cover our living expenses. And save whatever my husband earned for our future. Before we moved in together, my husband had clearly communicated this to his mother, warning her against being wasteful. However, since my husband left on his business trip, my mother-in-law had been indulging in watching TV infomercials daily and making frequent phone calls. It seemed she had likely ordered something. Amidst these thoughts, she bluntly declared, "I'm going to live here with my son. You should leave. I'll discuss the rest with my son. If he wants, you might even consider a divorce, so be prepared for that." At that moment, I realized arguing was futile. In resignation, I agreed I'll gladly leave. I swiftly packed my largest suitcase, carrying everything I could manage, and decided to depart from the house. Before leaving, I glanced at my mother-in-law, who was smirking at me. She laughed aloud and commented, "Oh, leaving so soon? That's not too bad of you. Maybe you could be a bit more charming." I couldn't recall doing anything to upset her to this extent. I had always provided her with rides when needed, and made an effort to spend time with her to alleviate any loneliness. Despite our decision as a couple not to have children, it was not within her rights to dictate our life choices. As anger surged within me, I thought that my mother-in-law would be the one regretting this in the end. With that thought, I left the house with my heavy luggage. Faced with the sudden directive to leave, I pondered where I would go. My childhood home was a plane ride away, and I couldn't abandon my job. Moreover, I didn't want to worry my parents. The first place that came to mind was my office. Running my own business, a small cafe, I employed 2 part-time students, but I primarily managed it on my own. The cafe is situated in a 1-story house, with the extra space used as an office and storage. Despite its modest size, there's enough room for someone to live. Typically, I commuted from home to the office. However, the idea of living at the office appealed to me, as it would eliminate the need to cook for my mother-in-law, allowing more time for work. As someone passionate about my job, I eagerly envisioned the extra working hours. While setting up a living space in the office, I cleared out piles of cardboard boxes and decided to sleep on the blanket I had laid out for napping. I arranged a table and chairs to make work more convenient. By evening, the 2 part-time students came in for their shifts and were surprised to see the office transformed. Once I explained the situation, they readily understood and even offered to help wherever needed. Feeling grateful for their kindness, I considered them valuable members of the team. They had received excellent feedback from our customers, who praised not only the ambiance and food quality, but also the service provided by the part-time staff. Contemplating raising their pay, I received a call from my husband, who was supposed to be on a business trip. Unfortunately, I could only check the message around 9:00 p.m. My husband mentioned he had returned earlier than expected, and upon arriving, noticed many of my belongings were missing. He confronted my mother-in-law, who initially refused to disclose my whereabouts. After pressing her for about an hour, she finally explained the issues between us, leading my husband to realize that I had left. Concerned, he quickly tried to contact me, resulting in several missed calls. Considering my husband didn't show up at my workplace, I appreciated his understanding of my situation. Feeling guilty about making him worry, I called him back promptly. When my husband answered, asking what had happened, I hesitated about whether to be honest about everything. However, his persistence compelled me to spill the truth. I briefly explained what my mother-in-law had done to me, and I could tell from my husband's voice that he was furious. He wanted to talk as soon as I finished work. After locking up the cafe office, I headed home. I had never seen my husband this mad before, so the thought of meeting him in this state was intimidating. I reached home around 10 p.m. and noticed that only the lights on the first floor were on. My husband and my mother-in-law must be in the living room. When I tried to unlock the door, my key wouldn't fit. I knocked on the door and my husband came out to unlock it. As I entered the living room, there sat my mother-in-law with a sulky expression. Apparently after I left, she had changed the locks without telling anyone. My husband hadn't noticed earlier since the door was unlocked when he got back from his trip. My husband immediately wanted to hear the whole story from me, so I told him about the incidents over the past week, explaining how my mother-in-law suddenly became overbearing, wouldn't listen during our talks, and went as far as spreading lies about me to the neighbors. Every time I pointed this out, she would accuse me of lying. However, when my husband insisted on hearing everything, she just went silent. After I finished speaking, it was my mother-in-law's turn. She claimed I was violent towards her and wouldn't stop even when she asked me to. She mentioned she had talked with neighbors, but the harassment from me only seemed to increase. She even began to say that if the neighbors were asked, they would know all about my actions. I wondered what made my mother-in-law so confident to make such outrageous claims. The conversation seemed to be going in circles and there was no clear conclusion. So I decided to show something to my husband. I had been collecting video and audio footage, and with just a few taps on my smartphone, I could record instantly. Over the past week, I had recorded every time my mother-in-law made snide remarks. Whenever I had the chance, I would prop up my phone to capture my mother-in-law harassing me on video. The footage showed her yelling at me to make dinner and even calling me defective for not having children. My husband was furious when he saw the footage, his face turning bright red. On the contrary, my mother-in-law looked pale as if she had seen a ghost. In a desperate attempt to save face, she claimed, "This isn't right, Catherine. It's just a misunderstanding. It seems like I'm the bad one, but that's because you cut out the parts where you were being mean. In reality, you've done much worse to me." However, my husband, who had experience with video editing, wasn't convinced. If the video had been edited unnaturally, he would have noticed right away. It seemed like my husband completely trusted me, just as I had hoped. He began considering living separately from my mother-in-law. Despite her vehement objections, my husband seemed firm in his decision. During this period, I decided to stay at the office. We discussed the possibility of living separately and how to proceed. Eventually, a conclusion was reached. We were going to send my mother-in-law to a nursing home. Although we had been against this idea before we moved in together, it seemed like a secure environment where she would be looked after 24/7. However, my mother-in-law had always expressed her reluctance to go into a facility, thinking it would be incredibly stressful for her. My husband revealed he had been considering this option for a while. With my mother-in-law's bad knee and both of us working, we couldn't provide her with the attention she needed. He believed that the only way to ensure her safety was for her to be in a facility. Despite her pleas not to be put in a facility, my husband stood firm. While he doesn't show it often, my husband truly adores me, starting from his relentless pursuit during our dating days to putting me first in our marriage. I anticipated that he would take my side over my mother-in-law's. However, my mother-in-law, apparently oblivious to this, assumed my husband would be on her side. When she learned about her placement in a facility, she quickly apologized to me. However, my husband remained upset and didn't listen to anything my mother-in-law said. Throughout all this, I focused on running my cafe. Initially open only for lunch, I expanded to serving breakfast and offering evening alcohol. To my surprise, the number of customers nearly doubled, and I inadvertently shared the news with my mother-in-law, thanking her for the opportunity. However, it came off as sarcasm and she didn't seem pleased. In the end, we chose the closest senior facility for my mother-in-law, despite its higher cost. It was known for its excellent services. Despite past tensions, I never wished ill on my mother-in-law. I'm thankful for her role in raising my husband. Forced into the facility, I heard she caused a lot of trouble, having disputes with other residents over minor issues like making eye contact or speaking too loudly whenever I visited. Fortunately, it never reached a point where they had to kick her out of the facility, but they ended up isolating her from the others. The staff kept me updated about her situation. Initially, she was quite spirited, but about 6 months into her stay, I was informed that she seemed to lose her energy, possibly feeling lonely without much interaction. Recently, with the help of the staff, I received a report that she is now able to converse well with other residents. However, it appears that her nature hasn't changed, and due to her bad attitude, she was eventually evicted from the facility. Although she moved to another facility, she ended up isolated, and her loneliness seemed to intensify, possibly leading to dementia. It's a bit sad that she had to be separated from her son, my husband. However, if it ensures everyone's peace, it might be for the best. Now I live in Europe with my husband. He had been traveling abroad more frequently for work, and recently he mentioned he wouldn't be able to return home for about a month. Then he suggested he would like to take me abroad with him. Although I ran a cafe and initially thought I couldn't possibly leave, 2 of my student workers were graduating, so I decided to close the cafe and follow my husband. I dreamed of running a restaurant abroad and set off for Europe. At first, the language barrier was tough, and I mostly stayed home. However, after making friends in the neighborhood, my perspective changed. A friend got me a job at the local grocery store, and gradually I was able to communicate better. Eventually, I decided to open a small cafe in a corner of the town. We had a house back in Oregon that was still being mortgaged. We contemplated whether to sell it or not, but due to some false rumors in the neighborhood, we sold it to fund the new cafe. Thanks to the many acquaintances I had made, a lot of people visited on the opening day. It was also promoted on social media as a homey cafe run by an American, and some customers even came all the way from the US. The reason I started the cafe was that I managed to get permanent residency in Europe. My husband's company proposed relocating him to their branch in Europe, so we ended up settling there. He eventually quit that job, but in his new job he seems to be really shining and is now earning about the same as I am. Now that we've settled down in Europe, with both of us working, it's challenging to figure out where to use our money. To our surprise, we found out we were expecting, despite being told that natural conception would be difficult. It feels like a gift from above. Raising a child will be challenging, but I believe my husband and I will manage. We can't wait to meet our baby, even though the due date is still far away. The town I live in is filled with friendly people, and when I shared the news of my pregnancy, everyone was genuinely thrilled for me. I believe that in this environment, our child will surely have a happy life.